Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for staying on after the main event. It's a little bit like, following a penalty shootout after a cup final or something like that. But I'll try and rattle through this because I know that we're running a bit behind. First and foremost, who are the British Business Bank? A couple of you have sort of come up and spoken to me over coffee this morning. There are a number of you that have had the dubious pleasure of listening to me rattle on over the last few weeks that will know some of this information anyway, so apologies for that. But we are the government's economic development bank. We are 100% owned by BEIS, so no pressure, the fact that I've got one of the bosses in the room really, effectively, to do this. We work as an arm's length PLC though. So we do have a member of BEIS that sits on our board, but everybody else on the board is independent and employed by the bank itself or non-executive directors, one of which is a chap called Piers Linney, who did a couple of seasons on Dragon's Den. Our focus, as it very much says up on here, is to look at the structure of the finance markets for small and medium enterprises. A key plank to the success of the UK. And I'll show you some stats as we move through the presentation that will kind of show you why we're focusing on that part of the market. So certainly our objectives initially were to look at the supply of finance. We were looking at getting more finance into the market by diversifying not only the number of providers that were out there, but also the number of products that were out there. We felt that was an important thing to do because we were being told at that stage that finance wasn't available for businesses that are out there at the moment. We also started to work on the information that was available to businesses out there to enable them to make the right kind of choices. And when I get to the end of the presentation, you'll see where the next logical steps of that are taking. Where do we intervene, if you like? At 3 stages, really, of a business journey: start-ups, scale-ups, which is what we're all about today, and obviously stay ahead. Now, what we don't do is we don't liaise directly with businesses. Our model in terms of how we work is effectively a wholesale model. We will work with the existing providers in the marketplace. There isn't a real need for additional providers out there. There is more than enough supply and more than enough invention within those suppliers to meet the needs of the market. What we need to have a look at now is maybe the other side to that equation, which is why businesses, to a degree, are not either requesting finance, or when they are requesting finance, maybe not being as prepared as they perhaps should be. Okay. But ultimately, our aim is to get increased investment in smaller and medium enterprises in the UK, which will help the UK economy grow and create jobs. Just very quickly, these are the component parts of the British Business Bank. One of them did get mentioned in Morgan's slide earlier, which is British Patient Capital, which is an equity funding scheme that looks at longer term equity funding. So extends very much what is the existing equity cycle of between 3 and 7 years before an investor would like to see a return on their money. The patient capital is looking at 15 to 20 year money, recognising that there are businesses whose journey from an initial concept to actually creating something that's creating revenue and therefore profit for them could be quite a long way down the line. Why smaller businesses? Why do we need to look at them rather than the big headline-grabbing multinational corporations that will throw in big numbers? Well, you can see 60% of employment in the UK sits within this sector, and also 52% of turnover. 99% of the businesses in the UK are SMEs, and a huge number of employees within it. So it's a very, very important part of the UK economy. So the challenge for us is to now look at the demand side. So some of the things that we've spoken about over the last few minutes as well, linked to that, is why is there a suppressed demand for finance in the UK? When you only had 17% of businesses apply for finance in the last 12 months, they can't all be of a position where they're quite happy to just tick along as they currently are. There has got to be businesses out there at the moment who would like to have finance but either don't know who to speak to or don't know how to prepare themselves for that. And that's absolutely the focus of what we're trying to do and trying to deliver. The model that we work with means that we link in with about 100 partners at the moment who are out there providing finance across the market. And by working with so many providers, we're able to identify gaps in the market and then start to create a solution alongside those delivery partners to fulfill that need. But ultimately, again, as you bottom right there, smaller businesses, we need them to prosper and grow to build the UK economy. So when we identify an issue, we bring the expertise in. We have some money which goes in alongside the private sector money. And as you can see, the range of organisations that we will work with to provide those solutions is very wide-ranging and varied. It covers an awful lot more than just where the majority of people think their business can be funded from, which is a loan from a high street bank. There's been a few of these slides in terms of who you work with. That's a small percentage of the businesses that we currently work with in terms of providing finance solutions out there in the marketplace, ranging from the big four banks to some very small niche providers. You probably won't be able to read half of those logos from the back, but I'm sure you'll be able to see it when the slides get circulated after. I talked about where our programs work. Startups, the Startup Loan Company belongs to the British Business Bank. I'll just come back to Scale Up in a second because that's really the reason we're here. The Stay Ahead programme is looking at the more mature businesses, or actually looking at how we work with the lenders in the market to get them in a position to actually lend further monies. Scale Up is the reason that we're here, and particularly with a focus on the manufacturing sector. And very much the programmes that we're all involved with around scale-up businesses are equity-based solutions. So those are where the business is rapidly growing. It may have either outgrown or maybe not have the track record that would mean that they are suitable for what I would class as high street bank finance. So those are the schemes we're really working hard to ensure that businesses have access to the information that will point them in the right direction of where to obtain that type of finance. And we're working with people like the UK Business Angels Association to ensure that networks of angels are far more widely known than they are at the moment. We talked on one of the previous presentations, I think it was on Lynn's, when she was talking about Cambridge. The equity market in Cambridge is very well known, very well publicised. If you work and live around Cambridge, you would undoubtedly know somewhere to go to talk to somebody about equity finance. If you're out on the Norfolk coast or the Suffolk coast, maybe not so. But those regional imbalances are very key for us to try and address and move forward so that businesses, wherever you're based in the UK, have access to all of the solutions that could help you make that right business investment and move your business forward. So we currently supported the best part of $6 billion worth of finance that's gone out into the market at the moment, the majority of which would be with businesses at the moment who have no inclination or no appreciation that actually the British Business Bank have been involved in the background, and that's not really what we're after. We're not after pats on the back. What we're after is actually just getting that finance out there, and we're grateful for all the partners that we work with that deliver that for us. Over 82,000 businesses. Now that's a number, but when you think that 382,000 businesses started in the UK last year, that's more than 1,000 businesses per day. We're still barely scratching the surface in terms of what the impact we can have. We have had some impact. So certainly on the far left, you can see that our initial efforts where we looked at the supply of finance has driven the amount of finance available for businesses up since we were brought into play in 2014. But interestingly, when you look at the second graph there, the percentage that's delivered outside of the big four banks with our involvement is increasing. So up to, in 2017, 2018, 96% of the finance that was delivered to businesses in the UK, backed by the British Business Bank, was outside of those products delivered by the main four high street banks. That is not to decry what they do, absolutely not. They are by far the biggest providers of finance out there. But actually what we're recognising is there is a place for alternative solutions that they can't always provide. Certainly the third graph shows that we've made a bit of a difference in terms of awareness of different forms of finance, but again, there's some huge geographical differences. People's knowledge and understanding about how equity finance works, or venture capital, or even some of the newer players in the market, peer-to-peer funding and crowdfunding, varies hugely, not only from region to region, but with also from town to town within regions. This is some of the statistics that show there is absolutely still a need for us to focus on what we do. I've mentioned already, only 17% of businesses sought finance in the last 12 months. 46% of those only approached their relationship bank and then stopped. 18% of those that did apply for finance didn't get what they were asking for in the first place. Now, that may be because I talked earlier about how well prepared businesses are when they go to a finance provider. And it could be that what they were asking for was either not the right type of finance or actually the right amount of finance for what they need. In my years as a bank manager, very often when you would challenge a business over the figure that they put in front of you that they would like to borrow, would say, well, when I asked, how have you come to that figure? If they were honest, they would say, well, that's because that's the figure I think you might give me, rather than that's the amount that I actually need to fulfill the need that my business has. So we're very conscious of that. And this is why we're convinced that there is latent demand for finance out there at the moment. 49% of those businesses that didn't get the finance they need just gave up. And that's too many. That's too many. With a very low number of contacts, they then give up and they stop. So if that investment hasn't taken place, that's growth that won't take place. That's jobs that won't be created. So that is certainly something that we need to make inroads into. How are we doing that? Well, we do some research on behalf of government where a lot of those statistics come out. If you really do have an awful lot of time to spare, you can look at the Small Business Finance Markets report online. The paper version would make a very good doorstop, but there's some very, very valuable information that sits in there in terms of how the market's working at the moment, and that starts to drive where we have our focus. Okay. There's also the UK Female Founders report. One of the statistics that came out of our last report, that for every pound that's invested in UK businesses in terms of equity and venture capital in the UK, less than a penny of that goes to all female-founded businesses. And I've had some conversations with a couple of you that that's a subject that's very close to your heart and something that needs to be addressed. How are we providing some information? Now, this is our newest portal. It's our finance hub, which can be found on our website, where a business can put in a very limited amount of information. Basically, what do you do? Where are you based? How much do you want? What do you want it for? Do you make a profit? And does your business have any assets? So none of that is particularly personal to you, so there's no GDPR issues or anything in terms of putting personal information on there. But from those 6 very basic pieces of information, we can start to give you information on the solutions that might be right for your business in those circumstances. There are 17 different funding options that sit behind that portal. Now, as a bank manager of 30 plus years experience, if somebody gave me a blank piece of paper listed 1 to 17, would I have been able to list what those 17 options are? No. So what we're trying to do is to pull together all the information that's available to you, success stories, so linking you to businesses that have had that particular type of finance, but very importantly to tell you about how that market works. So who regulates it, what are the pros, what are the cons, what things do you need to have ready and prepared in your business if you're approaching an investor, for example? Or if you're going to a peer-to-peer lender or a crowdfunder, what sort of information are they going to want from you? So we're helping a business prepare so that when they have that conversation about finance, that they are in a much better position to obtain it first time and don't get that, well, you need to come back if you do this, 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 and the other. We also have a paper-based version, the Business Finance Guide. There are a couple of copies of that floating around on some of the stands, and if you want a copy of that, I'm sure the guys at the Growth Hub, who I know have had several boxes of them delivered, can get them to you if you let Susie know afterwards. That's a whistle-stop tour in terms of what we do. It's a huge ask in terms of finance to businesses, but it's quite interesting that we've had some contrasting opinions come up. Just today, we had Chris, who mentioned that he didn't have access to a bank manager in his particular story, and Lindsay saying that at the time when their business needed it at early stage, they couldn't find banking support. But then the flip to that was that in Charlotte's presentation, access to finance didn't appear in the top 3 issues from manufacturing businesses across the UK. So the answer is somewhere there in the middle, is how we put together the businesses that do want that finance with the people that are there, ready, willing and able to provide the finance for them. So that's the ongoing challenge that we have. I will be about very briefly afterwards, or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those during the Q&A.
Before you go, Paul, you know, the disaster of the global restructuring of RBS, what they did is really frightened lots of people off.
Yep.
In fact, recently I've had 3 occasions, one which I was involved in, and we managed to bully their way out of it, but they had a most unpleasant experience. Good business, profitable, good margins, growing customer base, now we want our money back.
Yep.
So that was the first one. The second one is a business said, well, I've got a fantastic opportunity here, but I am risk averse when I go to the finance industry. I don't really want to be involved. And the third one was another company which already had an investor, and they said, well, look, sorry guys, if you go down that track, I'm out. So how do we, well, firstly, what are you guys doing to help, let's say, recreate the confidence in the financing of small businesses? And secondly, how do we let the wider community know that actually that was a real anomaly, it's not going to be allowed and not tolerated in the future?
Okay. Yeah. Which one of those 5 questions should I go to first?
I understand that,
no,
you know, businesses get into trouble,
yeah,
you know,
I think
that's not the point I'm making.
No, I think
these are good businesses which were ruined by
yes,
that.
and also, you know, very much one of the things that we talked about in communication on the session with Dan is that bad news kind of travels fast, and people remember things that don't work and things that don't happen. I think some of the situation that we're in at the moment is people are still harking back to post-2008, 2009, where very much the issue was there's nobody out there to lend me money. And I think there are still a good proportion of businesses that won't approach finance because of that, because they think the answer is going to be no. If you speak to any lender and provider that's out there at the moment, they've got capacity to do more. Their frustration is they're not seeing businesses in front of them who are readily prepared, who are in the right space to borrow money. You know, if there is, you know, any remaining bankers in the room, I think Alex is still there. I think, you know, that is a huge frustration when you say to a business that actually they need to do a little bit more preparation or they need to put a little bit more work in beforehand. You're generally finding that request has come in at the 11th hour, they need the money next week and they haven't got the time to prepare it.
Okay.
What we're trying to provide is information so somebody can have that knowledge and understanding really of what the bank or whatever provider is going to ask well in advance, so when they go in there's a far greater likelihood of them being told yes and get the positive answer. But the whole negative piece, it's the same getting pieces into the press.
Okay.
You'd much rather get, or you'd much
so if you need help, ask and we'll find a way of doing it.
Yeah, certainly.
Okay.